Bum. Vishnu Padaya Nam Krishna Padaya Utale Imate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Tina Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Padaya Utale Imate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Namaste Saraswate Devi Gauravani Pracharine Vasesha Sanyavadiki Paschatyaresha Karine Namaste Saraswate Devi Gauravani Karine Nirvasesha Sanyavadiki Paschatyaresha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Radha Shiva Sahati Gauravakta Vrinda Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Radha Shiva Sahati Gauravakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Issues here. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Bolo, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Shri Prabhupada ki jai. Go Premanandi, Hari Hari Bo. Hare Krishna. Good morning, everyone. Good evening. Good afternoon. This morning I am in France still, and we're in a different location. I'm in a place called Bordeaux, which is one fairly large city in France. We're here for trying to distribute Srila Prabhupada's books on Sankirtan, and also we're having one or two programs here over the weekend with some local people who are interested. And then we will, hopefully after that, we will be going for book distribution. And as I mentioned, or you may have heard, this may be our last Zoom class this year because of the Prabhupada Book Marathon, which is well underway. And maybe some of you are engaging in this glorious yajna, the sacrifice of assisting Srila Prabhupada in spreading the message of Krishna consciousness far and near. And in France, so far, the devotees are, despite the fact that officially there's a lockdown, there's not really much of a lockdown going on. And the devotees are going out pretty much every day, those who are going out, and distributing Prabhupada's books and doing quite well. And we're hopeful that this will be our best marathon this year. Let's see. So today we're going to continue with our session on the Nectar of Instruction. I'm just going to adjust here a minute. Let's see where we are. Okay. So we'll continue with our reading from the Nectar of Instruction. If our Rasikananda Prabhu will be kind enough to put up the verse on the board. Oops. Om Agyara Timiranda Syagananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupakadamayam Dadati Shvapadantikam Vandehang Shri Guru Shri Utapadakam Shri Guru Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Pitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Vanamami Hari Priye Panchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Vyayevyacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Vishtaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Namaste Saraswate Devi Gauravani Prachardine Nivasesha Shunyavadi Pastachadhe Shatardane Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. So the verse is there. If we like to repeat, please, we can chant all together if you wish, or you can repeat after me. Atyahara prayashascha prajaponi amagraha janasangascha lolyam cha shadbir bhakti vinashyati. Atyahara prayasascha prajaponi amagraha janasangascha lolyam cha shadbir bhakti vinashyati. Atyahara prayasascha prajaponi amagraha Janasangashcha lolyam cha shadbir bhaktir vinashyati. Atyahara priyashascha prajaponi amagraha Janasangashcha lolyam cha shadbir bhaktir vinashyati. Last time. Atyahara priyashascha prajaponi amagraha Janasangashcha lolyam cha shadbir bhaktir vinashyati. So this verse today will be I think it'll be our last session on this verse. And today we're dealing with the final 6th item, which here Rupa Goswami is emphasizing can be very detrimental, destructive to one's devotional service. And the last item today is lolyam, being greedy for mundane achievements. And we will read a little bit. First, we'll read the verse. No, we won't. We've read it. So, purport. Maybe a little difficult to find. It's, I would say, it's a little bit over halfway through the purport. Paragraph desires, starting with desires. And Srila Prabhupada writes here, commenting on this, here we are, desires to expand. Desires to expand. Desires to expand the mind by perfecting mystic yoga. It's interesting here, we don't normally relate these items to greed. But when we look a little bit more into greed later on, lolyam literally means greed. It has some other meanings too, which we'll discuss later. But the normal meaning we hear is greed. Desires to expand the mind by perfecting mystic yoga. We wouldn't normally relate that to necessary greed. But we'll see later on how it's related. To merge into the existence of Brahman also comes under this category. To attain whimsical material prosperity. We can understand that one probably. To attain whimsical material prosperity are all included within the category of greed or lolyam. All attempts to acquire such material benefits or so-called spiritual advancement are impediments on the path of Krishna consciousness. They occupy our mind and intellect, completely absorb us. We have a goal, and our energy is directed towards trying to fulfill that goal in various ways. We'll get more into that a little later on. The next section Prabhupada talks about, you could say, how the various obstacles on the path are related to each other. They're overlapping very much. Atyahara and Lolya, especially, Prayash, these overlapping each other very much. In terms of the modern examples we could give of even up to the national level, even universal level. And now they're trying to sell plots of land on the moon, as if we own the moon. And whether or not anyone's ever been there or not, it's a hoax, a falsity of thinking, it is ours to, whatever, purchase or sell. It's not. And we're never satisfied with what we've got, practically speaking. We know in the Bhagavad Gita how Krishna says it's just like fire when you pour. The more you pour in it lust, the more we try to satisfy lust, the more lust increases, because there's greed. We're never satisfied. Greediness is basically an urge based on lack of satisfaction, always wanting more and more and more. And we see this is one of the symptoms of the demoniac mentality in the Bhagavad Gita in the 16th chapter. We can read therein how Krishna describes the demoniac mind or the demoniac nature. No matter how much they've got, they want more and more and more. I will conquer more and more. I will have more wealth, more fame, more knowledge, more beauty, more opulence, whatever it may be, more women, etc., etc. And basically speaking, in this material world, there is no satisfaction to this greed. I'm going to read a little bit further down the purport, maybe a page or two further down, where Prabhupada discusses this unfortunate situation in the material world, and how people are, no matter what system of management they have, there's no solution to this problem, whether it's communist or capitalist or whatever it is. The tendency of people is we always want to get more, and we always want to accumulate more and save more, etc., etc. It's an illusion which keeps us bound up in the material world. Very fearful situation also. Always afraid of losing. Thank you, come right to the spot. Krishna conscious devotees know well that this material world is designed by the complete arrangement of the Lord to fulfill all the necessities of life for all living beings, without their having to encroach upon the life or rights of one another. Prabhupada has just discussed the famous verse, Isha Vashamidam Sarvam Yakincha Jagachanti. This famous verse from Ishopanishad, which describes how everything animate and inanimate that is within the universe is controlled and owned by the Lord. This is the solution to greed. One should therefore accept only those things necessary for himself, which are set aside as his quota, and should not accept other things, knowing well to whom they belong. And our tendency is we want to usurp that which we don't really need. And it's not just wealth, it can apply to all the various categories, all the opulences of the Lord, knowledge, so many things. We want to get the beauty of others, we want to enjoy others more and more and more. Tendency is based upon seeing oneself in the center, and consequently our intelligence and our mind become overwhelmed with greed. They're always planning how to expand. Even if we're poverty stricken, we're still planning how to achieve these purposes all the time. This is more or less, although we read in Srimad Bhagavatam, in the second chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, how Sudha Goswami is emphasizing so much the kamasya nendriya pratilabhuti, that this human life is not meant for that purpose. Human life is meant for spiritual advancement, inquiry into the nature of the absolute truth. That should be the goal of our work. And unfortunately, we don't do that. We're very busy in trying to adjust, improve, expand our material situation. So reading on in this little purport here, this complete arrangement affords the proper quota of wealth for everyone according to his real needs. Thus everyone may live peacefully according to the principle of plain living and high thinking. Prabhupada wanted this. He wanted to establish a society which would be favorable for the cultivation of Krishna consciousness. That means simple living, high thinking. Unfortunately, materialists who have neither faith in the plan of God nor any aspiration for higher spiritual development misuse their God-given intelligence only to augment their material possessions, to expand or improve their material possessions. They devise many systems, such as capitalism and materialistic communism, to advance their material position. They are not interested in the laws of God or in a higher goal, always anxious to fulfill their unlimited desires for sense gratification. They are conspicuous by their ability to exploit They're fellow living beings. This is the nature of greed. It has no end. Huh? It never seems to come to an end. It's ever increasing, and causing so much disturbance to others. And very frustrating too. People are never satisfied no matter how much they've got. So I'm going to read something now, or at least discuss something from Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur on this subject. As we've been mentioning, there's this little book called Shiva Tialoka, which describes a little bit more extensively each and every one of these points in this verse today. And in the first 3 or 4 verses of instruction are described at length in this book. And he starts off with a description of lolya. Lolya generally is termed as greed, but he describes it as his actual meanings are restlessness, greed, and desire. 3 things. Restlessness, greed, and desire. And restlessness is of 2 kinds. There's restlessness of the mind and of the intelligence, both. Restless means they're always wavering, never staying still. The mind has the propensity for following the dictates of the senses. I'm sure we're all quite experienced in that regards. When the mind follows the dictates of the senses and becomes absorbed in a particular subject, attachment or aversion arise. They're both equally challenging. Therefore, restlessness of the mind is of 2 types. Restlessness due to attachment and restlessness due to aversion. And we both see that. We can all see that when we're very attached to something, we become very, restless basically to try to achieve it. And when something's averse, when we're averse to something also, we're eagerly trying to avoid it or to get rid of it or something like that. In the Bhagavad Gita, there are many related verses to this. In the 2nd chapter, famous verse, Indriyanam hi charatam yamano navajidiyate, how the boat on the water is swept away by a strong wind. Even one of our roaming senses can carry away the man's intelligence. They can easily be drawn away, very easily, due to our weak, let's say our many-branched intelligence, our weak intelligence, unfocused, and its strong senses. And we get easily carried away in our particular nature, our conditioning. We see things in such a way and react accordingly. However, what to do about this? So Krishna also explains what to do about this tendency to be controlled by the lower senses and the sense objects. In the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita Text 34, it says, Indriyasya indriyatarte ragadvesha vyavastito tayor navasham agachet to yasya paripantano. This is one of the cures for this restlessness under the title of Lolya. There are principles to regulate attachment and aversion pertaining to the senses and their objects, which should not come under the control of such attachment and aversion, because they are stumbling blocks on the path of self-realization. And be careful that we don't be controlled by them. So they're principles, we can't give them up immediately. So the principles to regulate, to control. One is able to regulate their eating and sleeping, recreation, work, etc. Can become free of the miseries of material existence. So we can come free of the being controlled by attachment and aversion. Ragadvesha vivastito. Everyone's controlled. These 3 things, lust, greed, and anger, are the gateways to hell, described by Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. In order to regulate lolya in the form of restlessness of mind, one has to take shelter of the goddess Bhakti Devi, ultimately. So this is now, 1 is regulation, 2 is, let's say, the objective of our regulation, or the nature of our regulation, is under the direction of Bhakti Devi. Not just people in general may be regulating their life, but the basis of their regulation is still greed. material desire, and like that, and restlessness, and desires to accumulate more and more material objects in this world. So they're still controlled by greed, even though they're regulated. Their regulation is to fulfill greedy intentions. So when we're controlled by Bhakti Devi, or let's say regulated by Bhakti Devi or devotional service, that's the idea, the regulated principles of freedom. Paripantano mentioned this verse here. So we have to, if we want to get freed of this control of greed, a negative control of greed, we have to take shelter of Bhakti Devi, or devotional service, regulated principles of devotional service. They may seem to be restraining us, but because we identify with this mind, which is under the control of the senses, we think freedom means to allow the mind to wander and to try to fulfill any amount of material desires that come its way. But actual freedom is when we're freed of that control. And principle Bhakti Devi is presence there through the media of the pure devotees and Shastra, etc., to give us some direction in our life. So we're not simply living for material sense gratification. Let's see, we'll jump on a little bit here. Then he describes, okay, there's the mind, which is restless, attachment and aversion. Then there's the intelligence. The intelligence also has to be controlled. Until the restlessness of the intelligence is vanquished, how will the restlessness of the mind be checked? It's not possible. The intelligence, function of the intelligence is to discriminate, to, basically speaking, organize the mind's thoughts and discriminate which is favorable, which is not favorable. So if the intelligence is restless also, weak and restless, then there's no question of controlling the mind either. When the restlessness of the intelligence is vanquished, the mind can regulate attachment and aversion for sense objects by the strength of the intelligence. We see this in the Bhagavad Gita, in many, many places, the importance of our intelligence and regulating or controlling the intelligence. Krishna himself ultimately is the intelligence, the super soul. The intelligence is that which discriminates between the mind's good and bad propensities. That intelligence is of two types, resolute and many-branched. Famous verse in the Bhagavad Gita, Vyavasayatmika buddhiri keo kuranam, bahushaka yanantas chabodyo vyavasayanam. Very famous verse in the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Prabhupada refers to this verse many, many times, and in fact he also refers to this verse as being a major impetus in his preaching Krishna consciousness, his resolute determination, intelligence fixed. Those who are on the spiritual path, Krishna says, are resolute in purpose and their aim is one. O beloved child of the crews, the intelligence of those who are irresolute is many-branched. Those who don't have a fixed purpose. So that's another thing, regulating the senses, engaging in activities under the direction of bhakti, and having a goal. In the Bhagavad Gita purport, maybe not to this verse, but to one verse, Prabhupada says that all the anxiety or the difficulties that people go are due to want of an ultimate goal. They don't know what the goal of life is. And their intelligence is constantly, let's say their goals are constantly changing. Their intelligence is going from one thing to another to try to satisfy the never-ending desires that come into the mind. It never ends. They don't know what the goal of life is. To enjoy the material world, never-ending senses. They're just like rivers that pour into the ocean, and they never stop flowing. Material desires never stop. And to try to either curtail them or to to fully satisfy them is not within the grasp of the conditioned soul, because we're under the influence of material energy, which is relentless. And for one who is controlled like this, whose intelligence is many-branched, then they cannot really practice devotional service. We're not focused. We all have this challenge also, maybe the experience of how difficult it is sometimes to focus on devotional service because our mind is thinking of so many things, and intelligence is busy in trying to rationalize, discriminate, and apply the various thoughts within the mind. And they're not always so favorable to devotional service. We jump forward a little bit. Let's see. There are two types of intelligence, it's described also. The propensity to discriminate between good and bad under the dictation of the mind is called mundane intelligence. So mostly we use our intelligence in this world almost exclusively in the form of mundane intelligence to discriminate the various material thoughts within the mind between good and bad. Is called mundane intelligence, and the intelligence to discriminate between good and bad under the dictation of the soul is called spiritual intelligence. So when our intelligence is used to release the soul from our encasement or entanglement in this material world, and to discriminate which activities are favorable, as it's one of the, or two rather, of the principles of Sharanagati or surrender, is to accept that which is favorable, to reject that which is unfavorable in the execution of devotional service. So that's proper intelligence, or one aspect of it, to discriminate favorable and unfavorable in the path of devotional service. With in material intelligence, we're always doing that to try to fulfill our temporary goals in this life. Acceptance and rejection, attachment and repulsion. These dualities are always there. That can be purified by channeling this tendency in devotional service to accept that which is favorable and reject that which is unfavorable in the service of Bhakti Devi to achieve our ultimate goal, going back to Godhead. Let's see, we'll go on a little bit further. And we know from Bhagavad Gita how Krishna describes how the mind is higher than the senses, the intelligence is still higher, and the highest of all is the soul, of course. In the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, we find quite often Krishna uses this term sthita pragya, one whose intelligence is fixed or steady. So coming to this platform, to get fixed intelligence, we have to be focused on something which is fixed. The material is flickering. It never stops. It's always moving. And our senses are always flitting from one thing to another. So how can the intelligence be steady when the object on which it's focusing is unsteady? It's constantly being drawn here and there and everywhere, like being blown around like a ship at sea, depending on the direction of the wind. The example is given in the Bhagavad Gita, how the living entity is a passenger in the vehicle of this body. The intelligence is supposed to be the driver. And intelligence is not in control of the reins, which is like the mind, under the control of the horses. Then when the situation is quite precarious, we don't know where we're going next, being drawn around through many species of life in this material universe, up and down on the samsara cycle. The living entity is being tossed around. So to bring that chariot of this material human form of life under control, the intelligence has to be strong. So that intelligence is, in case of Arjuna, he shows a perfect example. He takes shelter of Krishna's intelligence. Kindly guide me. What should I do? Please direct me. I am a soul, surrender unto you. Taking shelter of Krishna. Krishna is our intelligence, and both as the super soul and as the external manifestation of the super soul, as the spiritual master guiding us. Otherwise, our intelligence is impure. We come to an impure conclusion. Regularly this happens. We base it upon our own conditioning. Even though, in one sense, we sometimes hear perhaps something which is maybe a good instruction, but we don't know how to apply it. And we apply it inappropriately, and we don't get the result. The intelligence has to be used in a beneficial way, not simply not a whimsical way. Prabhupada writes further down here, it's a nice verse. Oh, this is a famous verse. Vishaya vinivartantena rahavastudena. Vasavajam sopyasya pram dishtvana vartate. Bhakti Vinod Thakur, excuse me. Very important verse. And the essence of this verse, in one sense, is the param drishtva vartate. It is unless we have a higher taste, it's not possible. Even if we know that the pursuit of material sense gratification, trying to fulfill our unending desires, the restlessness of the mind, etc., we may know that this is not good. And most people have some experience of that. Sometimes they go a little bit depressed or unbalanced as a result of seeing the futility of this and not knowing what to do about it. When Param Dishvan Navartate, one has to have some higher taste if we want to, genuinely speaking, get free of the tendency to try to satisfy ourselves by trying to exploit this material world. We have to have a higher taste. So, and we'll go on. Another meaning of the word lolium, so that's restlessness. The restlessness of the intelligence and mind are always flickering from one thing to the next, never stable. And that continues in devotional service, but because Bhakti Devi is there, it can gradually become purified. And hopefully we'll gradually come to our goal so that we can perform some tapasya, some austerity to achieve that goal, devotional service. Not just doing whatever our mind demands or whatever our intelligence discriminates, but ultimately doing what Krishna wants. It takes a little bit of purification. Another meaning of the word lolium is greed, the most common meaning. If greed is directed to other objects, then how can it be applied in relation with Krishna? It's a simple thing, which we briefed on already. If our mind is occupied in thinking of material sense gratification or the objects of the senses, how can we be focused on Krishna? As Prabhupada says, you can't go east and west at the same time. You need to go one or the other. So channeling and engaging our senses and mind in relationship with Krishna is a process of transforming the direction of our goals in life, our intelligence, to think how to spread. Generally, Prabhupada has mentioned just several times, he has mentioned that the way we do this is to use our intelligence, how to spread Krishna consciousness. For instance, now, how to distribute more books. That would be a positive use of our intelligence, something purifying towards our intelligence. Then the intelligence would then use the mind. Then on the platform, the mental platform, thoughts, how to distribute more books, thinking how to do it. Intelligence will discriminate which is the best method of doing it. And then if the mind, whatever mind and intelligence together, convinced now that this is what we're going to do, they engage the body and the senses therein in trying to fulfill that plan. And the same principle applies in the material world. But when we use it, how to spread Krishna consciousness, how to distribute more books, intelligently, not just mindlessly, but intelligently. And maybe we have to adjust. So the intelligence duty is to adjust the various thoughts or the various plans which come up in the mind. The intelligence has to discriminate which is the most favorable, which way should we go, where should we go, how should we go, what she will say, and this, that, the other. So many different things. Intelligence has to try to ascertain what is most favorable for one's purpose. If one's goal is to distribute books, what is the best way? Maybe the best thing is to approach somebody who knows how to do it, or to associate with someone who's very pure or very expert or whatever it may be. And not be lazy. You can't be lazy and just stick to a process which doesn't work. That's a kind of a laziness. It's not very favorable for our ultimate goal. We shouldn't be attached to that either. Let's see, we'll go on here. Greed should be carefully engaged in the service of Krishna. Greed for material enjoyment should be conquered by the above-mentioned method. That is why it is said that persons who are overcome by lust and greed cannot become as pure through the process of yoga as they can by serving Krishna. So that above process, of course, is engaging whatever it is, the objects of the senses, the mind, everything, in the service of Krishna. And because Krishna is all purified, it's not enough just to restrain one's senses from the objects, but it's we have to connect our senses or our thoughts with the object of Krishna, objective goal of Krishna. Let's see, we'll move on a little bit. So now we're going to go on to the positive thing. Desires for material things and spiritual things, greed for material or spiritual, and restlessness for material objects. And we can also be restless for attaining Krishna consciousness. All these things can be, you could say, transformed towards Krishna. By the mercy of one who becomes greedy by seeing the Brajbasi's service to Krishna is very fortunate. By developing greed for Krishna's service, the Vaishnava service, and chanting the holy names, there will be no greed for inferior things. So we become greedy for this. This is the main point. By developing greed for Krishna's service, the Vaishnava service, and chanting of the holy names, there will be no greed for inferior things. One's material, by the mercy of that greed, spiritual greed, he attains the qualification for pure devotional service for Raga Bhakti, spontaneous devotion. The more we become greedy for devotional service, not greedy to attain a position in the association of devotees, not greedy to get results, not greedy to get praised or whatever it may be, but greedy to engage in devotional service in its various forms, eager to come for Mangalarti, eager to chant japa, eager to go for Sankirtan, eager to cook for Krishna, eager to read, chant, hear, whatever it may be, but some eagerness there, some strong desire to obtain it. So in the one's material greed is vanquished in proportion to the development of greed for its spontaneous devotional service. Now there you go. Simultaneously, as our enthusiasm or our greed for devotional service increases, our greed for material sense objects or possessiveness will diminish. Greed for anything not related to Krishna is most despicable because it degrades the living entity. Now, in the Grihastha life, Vinay's life, there may be different details there. For a Grihastha, then there may be certain objects which one may have to obtain in the service of one's family life, etc., but not more than required. Not more than required. And if we have a strong greed or hankering for certain things, there's another art. It may not be the ultimate, stage, but there's the art of taking those. It's like Prabhupada said, if a man is attracted to a woman, bring the woman to Krishna. See her as Krishna's gopi. Bring her in front of the deities, introduce her to Krishna, whatever, and vice versa. Trying to connect the objects of our greed to Krishna gradually purifies us. Especially in Grihastha life, this would be the case. Our children, our family, our home, everything to try to connect it with Krishna. Even though we may have had some material intentions involved, we try to channel or connect those various intentions to Krishna. And there'll still be enjoyments, it'll still be there. It's a stage. It's not the ultimate stage, maybe, but it is a stage in Grihastha life. We're enjoying, in a sense, enjoying the facilities therein, but in relationship with Krishna, the stage of purification, regulating them, etc. Another meaning of Lolya. Oh, here's another nice, beautiful verse before we go on to that. This is from Srimad Bhagavatam, and this is in the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. It's the sages speaking to Sutta Goswami. And in text 19, they say, we never tire of hearing the transcendental pastimes of the personality of Godhead. We never tire of it. In the material world, although we're greedy, greed never stops, but greed for certain objects, etc., may be curtailed. It may even become dry. It may dry up also. And it's never fully satisfying. We never tire, for spiritual life, the sages say, we never tire of hearing the transcendental pastimes of the personality of Godhead, who is glorified by hymns and prayers. Those who have developed a taste for transcendental relationships with him relish hearing of his pastimes at every moment, never tiring, ever fresh. The pastimes of Krishna, devotional service to Krishna are ever fresh. They never dry up. unlimited reservoir of nectar. It never dries up. Even Ravana's nectar within his heart was dried up by the Agastya weapon of Lord Ramchandra. So, but when the heart is full with devotion, it will never dry up. And we can be as greedy as we may be for more and more lolium devotional service. It will never dry up. It becomes ever fresh at every moment, relished over and over again. That's the difference in material wood. It dries up and causes so many negativities, both to ourselves and others. Unless desires are of two types, Bhaktivinoda says, desire for material enjoyment, which is, I guess, quite simple to understand and to relate to, and desires for liberation, which most people would not consider under the category of lolium, but it is because it is not related exactly to Krishna, it's related to me. I want liberation. So it's also under the category of being greedy for something which is unfavorable or unrelated to the pleasure of Krishna. Unless we give up these two types of desires, one cannot practice devotional service. There's a process of becoming free of attachment to these desires. It doesn't necessarily start immediately. It starts immediately, but it doesn't necessarily finish immediately. And so it's a process of becoming, and that we mentioned already, to engage ourselves in the service of Krishna. Therefore, unless the desire for enjoyment is completely uprooted from the heart, one's progress in devotional service will be obstructed. Completely uprooted, not just on the surface, not just that we stop indriyas-jate, just controlling us on the surface, but we have to go deep within. Otherwise, those who, there's that verse go, I've forgotten, but there's a nice verse in the Bhagavad Gita where Krishna explains that although one may withdraw one's senses from the sense objects, in fact, we just mentioned one similar verse, but there's another nice verse too. One who restrains his sense, but mind dwells still on sense objects is considered to see a pretender and a fool. And we have to, internally we have to change, not just externally may be helpful, but the internalization has to go on also. Not just withdrawing ourselves, or rather restricting one's sense gratification on the externals. We have to purify ourselves inside also, to develop a higher taste, to have a higher objective, to become eager with our intelligence, and to try to fill our mind with thoughts which are favorable for Krishna consciousness, and utilize our intelligence, how to fulfill those, how to cook nicer for Krishna, whatever it is, how to distribute more books, how to spread Krishna consciousness, how to dress the deities nicer, how to understand this Krishna conscious philosophy. Eager in that direction, that would purify our hearts right down to the root, as mentioned herein. And later on in the Nectar of Instruction, Rupa Goswami describes how we have to remove these material attachments right down to the very root by very carefully hearing and chanting about Krishna, focused, carefully use of the word, very with great care and attention. We should hear the sound of the holy name. Unless the desire for enjoyment is completely uprooted from the heart, one's progress in devotional service will be obstructed. Okay, now there's just a little comments on this verse, but I'm just going to now, let's see, yes, here we go. In the, if we look at the dictionary definition of greed, it's pretty similar to what Prabhupada has given also. Intense and selfish desire for something, especially wealth, power, or food. And selfish desire, intense selfish desire, is generally termed as greed. Wanting, great wanting, hankering for something which we don't absolutely require. And now in the Bhagavatam, Narada Muni, in preaching, was preaching to you, this dear Maharaj, on the various status of human life and how to organize human society in a way which will be effective. So there's some very nice verses in the 15th chapter of the 7th canto, and this is starting with text number 16. Very interesting points mentioned herein. One who is content and satisfied, and who links his activities with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, residing in everyone's heart, enjoys transcendental happiness without endeavoring for his livelihood. Where is such happiness for a materialistic man who is impelled by lust and greed, and who therefore wanders in all directions with a desire to accumulate wealth? And people are running around the world crazily, trying to get wealth, although they may not get very much. Nonetheless, they're very busy in trying to achieve it, flying around the world, driving all over the place, getting great anxiety and stress, and so on and so forth. Wars are being fought, political uprising, protests, so many things over greed, even illnesses. Many are resulting from greed, either mental and physical distress comes about. In the next verse, Narada says, for a person who has suitable shoes on his feet, there is no danger even when he walks on pebbles and thorns. For him, everything is auspicious. Similarly, for one who is always self-satisfied, there is no distress. Indeed, he feels happiness everywhere. So this is the secret, not just removing the objects of distress or restraining one's senses from them, but actually understanding them for what they are. It's Krishna's energy, Shavashamidam Sarvam. Krishna has given us a quota. We should be satisfied with our quota, knowing that this is a gift of Krishna, and not be greedy to get that which others, so-called, think that they possess, not more than we require. And this is the recommendation here to get peace of mind, freedom from the control of the sense objects. Then one can be satisfied. Similarly, for one who is always self-satisfied, there is no distress. Indeed, he feels happiness everywhere. And because it doesn't make any difference wherever one is satisfied. One knows within one's heart the nature of the objects around one, and that they're all Krishna's energy, and one feels a super soul within one's own heart. One is satisfied, knowing that Krishna is ultimately in control. Nothing is happening by chance. My dear king, a self-satisfied person can be happy even only drinking water. However, one who is driven by the senses, especially by the tongue and genitals, must accept the position of a household dog to satisfy his senses. Just give me a second. Jumping ahead too fast. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada writes, this is only a matter of practice. Unfortunately, however, no one is educated in how to be satisfied in self-realization. No such education. Quite the opposite. Education is enticing us to get more and more varieties of sense gratification. As explained above, a devotee is always satisfied because he feels the presence of the super soul within his heart and thinks of him 24 hours a day, remembering Krishna. This is the only object of satisfaction, is to remember the lotus feet of Krishna. So one who remembers this, no matter what situation they're in, even the greatest danger, even the most difficult, miserable condition, will be self-satisfied within, as he'll feel the presence of the Lord within their heart. This is real satisfaction. The devotee is never driven by the dictations of the tongue and genitals, and thus he is never victimized by the laws of nature. In the next verse, Narada says, because of greed for the sake of the senses, the spiritual strength, education, austerity, and reputation of a devotee or a brahmana who is not self-satisfied dwindle, and his knowledge gradually vanishes. Next verse. The strong bodily desires and needs of a person disturbed by hunger and thirst are certainly satisfied when he eats. Similarly, if one becomes very angry, the anger is satisfied by chastisement and its reaction. But as for greed, even if a greedy person has conquered all the directions of the world or has enjoyed everything in the world, still he will not be satisfied. Lust, greed, anger are the causes, the conditions, soul of bondage in this material world. Kama, Esha, Krodesha, Rajaguna, Samudbhava. When strong, lusty desires for sense gratification are unfulfilled, one becomes angry. This anger can be satisfied when one chastises his enemy. When there is an increase in lobha or greed, lobha is coming from loyam, which is the greatest enemy caused by Rajagun. Prabhupada writes here, is the greatest enemy caused by Rajagun. The mode of passion. How can one advance in Krishna consciousness? If one is very greedy, and this is how we can do it, the secret herein, if one is very greedy to enhance his Krishna consciousness, this is a great boon. Tattva ekalam mulam. This is the best path available. To become greedy, how to enhance our Krishna consciousness. And the next verse. O King Yudhisthira, many persons with varied experience, many legal advisors, many learned scholars, and many persons eligible to become presidents of learned assemblies fall down into hellish life because of not being satisfied with their positions. And even though they get what they thought they wanted, they're still not satisfied. They want more. And they're still never ending, burns like fire. Purport. For spiritual advancement, one should be materially satisfied. For if one is not materially satisfied, his greed for material development will result in the frustration of his spiritual advancement. There are two things that nullify all good qualities. One is poverty, daridra dosha, guna rashi nashi. If one is poverty-stricken, all of his good qualities become null and void. Similarly, if one becomes too greedy, his good qualifications are lost. Therefore, the adjustment is that one should not be poverty-stricken, but one must try to be fully satisfied with the bare necessities of life and not be greedy. This is against the grain, you could say, in our modern society. We may have to become a little familiar with bare necessities of life if necessary. Krishna may arrange that, but right now we're accumulating far more than is the bare necessities of life and spending much of our intelligence and mind's energy on trying to fulfill this unnecessary accumulation of various forms of sense objects. But perhaps Krishna has a plan, and maybe we'll have to start getting used to the bare necessities of life. There was a time, as we were discussing the other day, a time it wasn't so long ago, there was no electricity, there was none of these modern appliances, even all the tools and even the so-called off-the-grid machines which we use, all depending on electricity. They're all depending upon modern technology in some way or another. So to get completely off that situation is not something very easy, that's for sure. Previously, people lived their lives in very simplicity in this regards. We're not saying that they were more God conscious, but certainly from the material point of view, it wasn't so implicating. Now it's so complicated. So to simplify that, you can't take it away, but we can learn how to utilize all the various objects of our senses. Instead of hankering after them, being greedy for them, we can try to offer them to Krishna. This is the best way to purify at the root. It's not just a question on the surface, but at the root, by offering everything with Krishna, to Krishna, and gradually the very desire to be the enjoyer, the desire to be, possessor, this restlessness, this lust, this greed, these strong desires can all be dealt with. They can all be, controlled or made favorable to one's advancement in spiritual life. So poverty, people who are in poverty are also hankering all the time. for wealth. All, the majority are always busy. Their intelligence is so busy to try to get sustenance, to get something for their wine or whatever they use it for. Very busy, very restless, and very busy trying to fulfill their material desires, even though they're poor. And the same with rich people. They're always busy to protect their wealth, to accumulate more wealth, to see that their children have wealth, and so on and so forth, to show people how pious they are by using their wealth in the service of others, and so on. So all varieties of greed, all varieties of material desire and restlessness of mind. Therefore, the adjustment is that one should not be poverty-stricken, but one must try to be fully satisfied with the bare necessities of life and not be greedy for more. For a devotee to be satisfied with the bare necessities is therefore the best advice for spiritual advancement, enough to keep body and soul together. Learned authorities in devotion life consequently advise that one not endeavor to increase the number of temples and mats. Such activities can be undertaken only by devotees experienced in propagating the Krishna conscious movement. Otherwise, we see there also this greed, this tendency to possess more and more in control can also become a major feature. I'm the controller. This is my temple. This is my room. This is my this, and so on and so forth. And can easily creep in unless we're very mature devotees and not attached to the fruits of whatever fruits Krishna gives in our devotional service. All the acharyas in South India, especially Ramanujacharya, constructed big temples. Okay, it just goes on to say how the devotees may use a lot of wealth, may construct many buildings in Krishna consciousness, etc. And then Prabhupada says, even if such endeavors are considered to be greedy, just like sometimes devotees, they're very eager to obtain wealth, to use in Krishna's service on streets or anywhere, house to house, wherever it may be, online, to get wealth. And people might say, you guys are really greedy. But we're not. Maybe, hopefully not. But the greediness is to please Krishna. And Prabhupada says, even if such endeavors are considered greedy, the greed is to satisfy Krishna. And therefore, these are spiritual activities. So we may be a little bit greedy, but as we channel that towards greed, to render service to Krishna, to give contributions to the service of Krishna's mission, etc., then we can be purified. Everything can be related or directed towards the pleasure of Krishna. We're going to see. We'll just finish up with one more verse, which is a positive verse. This is in the where is this verse? Madhya Lila, Chaitanya Charitamrita 871. Krishna Bhakti Rasa Bhavitamati Kriyatam Yadi Kuto Pilabhyate Tatvalolyam Api Mulyam Ekalam Janmakoti Sukritya Nalabhyate. Pure devotional service in Krishna consciousness cannot be had even by pious activity in hundreds and thousands of lives. It can be obtained only by paying one price, that is, intense greed to obtain it. Lolyam. It is available. If it is available somewhere, one must purchase without delay. And that's one of the key verses. How to render service, intense greed, in association with those who have that greed. Knowledge also, convincing us about the absolute necessity of Krishna consciousness. The first is devotional service in accordance with regulated principles. The second is spontaneous. So there are two limbs in this direction. One is to devotional service in practice, and the other is in spontaneity. Regulated devotional service based upon religious, scriptural, or directions of other saintly persons. There's a spontaneous attraction. Now, in the first stage, we do have a level of spontaneity, which is very important in the practice of bhajana kriya. When we become spontaneously attracted to certain aspects of devotional service, deity worship, preaching, whatever it may be, farming,
some aspect which is engaged or a limb of devotional service. If we spontaneous, I can't miss, I must do. There's this growth of spontaneity. It's not just because of, it's because I want. I feel the urge, I feel the desire, I feel the taste. It may not be pure yet, it's not on the platform of pure spontaneity, because the object is of a particular kind, it appears to be external. We're attracted to a particular kind of person, a particular kind of service, a particular kind of whatever, place, etc. Tirtha, deity, something or another. There's a strong attachment there. So this is very purifying and very good. It's not the ultimate goal, you could say, but it would transform in due course of time into naturally spontaneous attraction towards Krishna without any misuse of our intelligence towards any other object. So keeping that intelligence of mind busy by linking them up with activities which we're enthusiastic to do, which we really want to do. We take guidance and checks from other devotees to make sure that this is an appropriate thing to do and an appropriate time, place, and circumstance to do it, etc. But the principle is there, becoming spontaneously attracted to a particular kind of service. And Prabhupada says that the first taste that the devotee may get in devotional service is for the service itself. When we become attracted to that service, and that attraction burns out our attraction to other objects, mundane objects, etc. So being situated like that, materially speaking, Vedic system, Varnashram system, a similar principle is there, that people, to be properly engaged according to their propensities, will naturally be more peaceful, and there will be a better circumstance for Krishna conscious development. On the spiritual platform, it's to be absorbed in activities which we have to be absorbed in the activities, then it burns up all the other desires, all the other tendencies to be absorbed in other activities. So being absorbed in activity which we may be a little bit easier to be enthusiastic about, which we're more propensity towards, can also be very, very useful, because there's less chance that one's mind will be dragged away to other unfavorable objects of sense gratification, objects which are not so favorable in the progress of our devotional service. Because when we're satisfied in the performance of our service, that won't happen. We may have experienced that in our lives of aspiring devotees, to when we're absorbed in some service, we're not bothered by what else is going on around us, even though others may be doing better, and so on and so forth. We're not swayed. We're no longer affected by envy, lust, and greed as a result of other objects or other personalities around us, but rather we're satisfied within our own hearts in the service which we're rendering. And for the basic principle underlying the talks between Lord Chaitanya, this verse which we just read was in the talks of Ramananda Roy and Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Underlying the talks between them will be spontaneous loving service to the Lord. The regulated principles, according to the injunctions of scriptures, are necessary insofar as one's original dormant Krishna consciousness is not spontaneously aroused. An example of spontaneous action is the flowing of rivers into the ocean. Nothing can stop the flow of the water. Similarly, when one's dormant Krishna consciousness is awakened, it spontaneously flows to the lotus feet of Krishna without any impediment. So none of these 6 items mentioned in the second verse of the Nectar of Instruction will perturb or disturb one whose actual intelligence, one's actual flow of attraction is towards the lotus feet of Krishna. Doesn't matter what it is. Even they may appear to overeat, it's in the mood of pure devotional service. Their association will always be to serve Krishna, always be to glorify Krishna, no matter what. Whoever they're associating with, they'll feel the opportunity here to share Krishna consciousness. They'll be greedy to expand the Krishna consciousness movement. Their endeavors will be to spread the Krishna consciousness movement to others, or to practice devotional service. They'll follow the rules and regulations which are favorable for the execution of devotional service, and so on. So that's what we're going to say today on the second verse of the Nectar of Instruction. And maybe there are some questions anyone would like to ask. Sorry about the screen. I'm sitting in an unusual position here. Okay, so we'll open up now to any questions or comments on this verse and active instruction, or anything else come to that. If you'd like to write something in the chat, please do, and we can discuss. I'll try to share something. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama. We need to be enthusiastic for devotional service, taking Krishna consciousness with book distribution. Most people are favorable to taking a book. Some may be averse and ask if it's a religious book, do we see them as unripened fruits? Or please suggest some favorable answers to those who are averse. Well, unripened fruits. It's nice if most people are attracted to the book. It's not always the case. The more we're attracted, the more likely that spark will come out of others. It's like in a situation where you try to plant a seed. If the soil is very hard, it's very difficult to plant it. The soil has to be somewhat fertile, softened. So the hearts of most people are, whatever they are, usually quite hard in terms of the planting of the bhakti seed. Very blocked, How to gradually soften the hearts through prasadam, through the behavior of a Vaishnava, the kirtan and so on, gradually softens their hearts so that people will eventually become softened, and the seed of bhakti lata bees, the seed may start to sprout. You can plant the seed in anyone's heart to a certain extent, it won't grow. Seeds grow when the soil's in the right, and the climate, everything is appropriate. They may grow. So we have to, a little work in preparation. So in this particular situation, suggest some favorable answers to those who are averse to the books. Well, in many ways, you don't even, at least where we are, those who are averse to the books, we don't generally even have a conversation. We're just not interested in discussing it all. So in many ways, we find that that's the case. But those who are, maybe you're talking to some people and they're averse, again, it depends on the main reason why they're averse to the subject matter. There may be many different reasons. They may be of a different denomination, can identify themselves with another religion. They may be gross atheists. They may be just Buddhists, just totally disinterested in any kind of subject matter except for gross sense gratification. Different types of persons do not surrender to Krishna. So what do we do? Well, that depends. We may not want to spend much time on that when there are so many people who are interested. The predominant thing, at least for a preacher, is to preach to the innocent and to avoid those who are averse, those who are atheistic. We may not need to spend so much time on them. You can find out, well, what are they interested in? Maybe you can get them to give a donation. Sometimes that happens. And sometimes, when a devotee, I was reading an article a couple of days ago, one devotee was so greedy in the sense for devotional service or distributing books, because so enthusiastic. And he was really enthusiastic. The last table he went to, in the restaurant, a man somehow or another was in very terrible health condition. But somehow he took the books and gave a good donation. He said, I'm an atheist. I have no interest in his books, but there's something about you. I don't know what it is. There's something about you which is making me buy these books. So when a devotee it's not a question of trickery. It's not a question of just word juggling. But when a devotee is very, very mature, tuned in, Krishna conscious, the super soul in the heart is guiding the wanderings. Is guiding the wanderings. So we just have to say, depending on the individual person, we don't waste time. But sometimes you can say, well, okay, I appreciate your feelings. I appreciate, everyone's got their freedom. Maybe we'd like to share something. Maybe we'd like to give a donation or something. We're doing a lot of other things too. I don't know. Depends where you are and what you're doing. try to engage people somehow in devotional service, or have a cookie. Say, okay, here, please take this homemade cookie or something like that. Something to soften their heart, something to try to engage them, because everyone, even if they don't engage, just seeing the book, Prabhupada says, their lives have become benefited. Touching the book, seeing the book, reading one line, everything is beneficial about preaching Krishna consciousness. Like if we're passing on the pure message, it's all auspicious. But we can't expect that we're going to be able to convince everybody. The majority of people are not yet ripe enough. They are unripened fruits in one sense. So we just have to keep trying to water and trying to ripen those little fruits by giving something or another which will help purify the hearts of the other living entities. Let's see. We theoretically know. Oh, hold on. What is the barometer to judge how much is enough materially? Normally we see that it is very hard to be satisfied in this material civilization. How do we know that enough is enough? A good question. In our modern society, in traditional society, it may not be so difficult to ascertain because society itself will be a barometer. And the members of society around us will be, you could say, the upholders of that barometer. Tradition, culture. It's a cultural thing, because what is enough for one is not enough for another. The Vedic system is devised into divisions of society, and for each division of society there's a different quota, and it's not based upon some sectarian thing, but rather upon the nature of the living entity. As for instance, in say in species of life, we see that one living entity needs 100 tons of food a day, maybe not that much, maybe 100 kilos a day. Another may need only 2 grams a day. Everyone has a different quota according to their position, their situation. So people too also have a certain amount of quota. But how do we judge that barometer? It's a very, say, that which is favorable. That which is favorable for cultivating or helping us in our spiritual lives. That which we don't have to over-endeavor to achieve too much. Of course, then we come into the category, well, I want to achieve more for Krishna. That's like another subject, which is a little line, but we have to be careful. It doesn't interfere with our practices of devotional service, whichever way, whether it's too much material or too much with the intention of we're over endeavoring in devotional service. Either way, it shouldn't impair our hearing and chanting. We should take that as the barometer more so than the other side of it. Maybe is that it's helping me, like eating. If you eat at night, last thing at night, and you notice that you can't get up in the morning, you can't concentrate, then you may wish to try to make an adjustment, because then it might be favorable for one's devotional service. It's that which is favorable for devotional service, or helps us in our practice of devotional service. If we notice that our material desires are increasing, then probably something's wrong, and probably something's not quite right in our balance or in our execution of devotional service or activities related to it. If we're finding ourselves becoming lazy, sleepy, negative, envious, etc., and this is obviously not a good sign. We're finding ourselves becoming critical of devotees, that's not a good sign. We're finding ourselves becoming more respectful towards devotees, more eager to try to see others engage in devotional service, more keen to hear and chant about Krishna, etc. These are good signs. So we take the various symptoms, various signs there, of symptoms of our practice, whether it's favorable or not favorable. Let's see. We theoretically know the principles, but life throws different challenges and we go on to survival mode, and the enthusiasm to do service gets distracted. How do we remain sober in those situations? Principles of life throw different challenges. We go to survival mode. Enthusiasm to say, yeah, we become absorbed sometimes in so many other things, reminding us how to remind ourselves, how to balance ourselves. The association of devotees, regular reading. We should regularly read Srila Prabhupada's books, regularly, daily. And reading the books, especially Prabhupada emphasizes, for the intelligence. We've been discussing a little bit about, unsettled intelligence and other factors, but the intelligence tends to be drawn away. So reading from Shastra, Prabhupada describes, helps to sharpen our intelligence, remind us what is the objective goal, because the objective goal is the same in all of our activities, although they may take on different natures. It doesn't appear that the objective goal is the same. But even our work, the objective of our work is to sustain our families, is to, whatever, maybe engage a certain amount in direct devotional service, to maintain a Krishna conscious household. If Krishna provides, through a particular occupation, without over endeavoring in the sense of working so hard we don't have any time for devotional service, that's not so good. Not good at all. But in the course of our normal service, or normal work, maybe, Krishna provides a certain amount of returns there, which we use in Krishna service. By the association of reading Prabhupada's books helps us to keep focused like that, and discussing in the association of similar-minded devotees how to overcome this tendency to get swallowed or carried away by the circumstances around us. Good association. So association and reading Srila Prabhupada's books. For a regular devotee who is not pure yet, when good or bad things happen in his life, is it due to personal endeavor, past karma, or does Krishna have a role in it, or is it a combination of all three? If so, which one predominates in a devotee's case? It might be something else altogether different too, but we can say for sure. Let's see, good or bad things happen. We have, from our material perspective, ascertaining our intelligence deciphers good and bad things. On the spiritual platform, there's not so much good and bad things. Forgetting Krishna is bad, remembering him is good. Aside from that, good and bad things in this world are simply external effects of karma. For a devotee, it's a little bit different. For a devotee, maybe we can say, oh, this is my karma. We often say things like this. But on the real platform, it's Krishna's allowing arrangement, in a sense, of various circumstances to purify the heart of the devotee. Krishna arranges various circumstances which are favorable to remove the tendency to perform various non-devotional activities from the heart. So we may call it karma, but it's strictly speaking, it is not karma. Sometimes Prabhupada calls it token karma, and Krishna uses this situation or arranges this situation in such a way as to release the devotee from the tendency to continue behaving in such a way as to entangle us in this material world. So in reality, for a devotee, it's Krishna's hand in play, but he does use his material energies in a sense, in such a way as to favor the devotee's release. Although we may see it as being the opposite. Why is this happening to me? Why am I being put in this situation? There's a higher reason why we're put in this situation, because Krishna wants to free us from this material world. And freeing from the material world means freeing us from the desire to try to enjoy this material world, from the mentality of seeing ourselves in the center as the enjoyer, as the proprietor, and so on and so forth. These are all various mentalities which are unfavorable to the progress of devotional service. So Krishna wants to take away all that is unfavorable, and he wants us to adopt all that which is favorable. So he often places the devotee in difficult situations for this purpose, so the devotee lets go, and his attachment to Krishna becomes stronger. He just takes shelter of Krishna. And there's no other shelter other than Krishna's lotus feet. we often have situations where one member of the family or a friend is inclined to devotional life, but others have no regards for spiritual practice. How should he or she act and behave in order to stay steady in the devotional service and pull others into the spiritual life? This is a tremendously common situation amongst many married, all devotees, but especially those who are married, because you have social responsibilities on all levels. You own your one's husband or wife, one's children, work. Everywhere we go, we have certain interactions and social responsibilities. Mm. So sometimes one of the family is very interested. You similar question which was asked earlier in that sense, that some people are ripe and some are not ripe. You can't pick those which are not ripe, but you can try to ripen them in various ways. So what is the method of ripening one's family members or friends or associates, whatever it is? More and more, even those who are interested, how are we going to interest them? Still more questions on different levels. But predominantly, religious principles are established by the behavior of a devotee. So how the devotees behave is very significant in people in general who are not yet ready for any philosophical interaction or direct practice of devotional service. I'm not even interested in chanting or hearing the holy name or anything. Somehow or another, the devotee's behavior can soften people's hearts. So we have to find, if you really have to, as I said earlier, there are so many people in this world today, and many of them are almost ready for devotional service. We don't spend all of our energy in trying to cultivate those who are not. Although in the course of our family and social life, we have to interact. In these cases, interaction may be one of friendly relationship or behavior which is exemplary, more exemplary, being manifesting nice qualities, attracts people's respect, if nothing else. We try to get them to respect the Krishna conscious movement, not that we try to make people angry or put them off by various means, that there's some kind of respect in their heart or appreciation of this, so that they see that there's something good about Krishna conscious, something. You can go a little further with prasadam and a few other things, probably some gifts now and again, recognition, give them some recognition of some kind of gift. It may be flowers offered to the Lord, it may be prasadam, preferably something Krishna conscious, something which may, let's say, pacify their hearts a little bit, maybe attract their hearts a little bit. But again, we can't expect that everyone's going to take it. Some people are adamantly opposed or simply don't want to even find out to see if they're opposed or not. And they may be afraid, and they may be very attached and conditioned, and that Krishna consciousness is going to interfere with my material lives, etc. A very common one. So Grihastha life to show that devotees are not irresponsible, poverty-stricken, irresponsible personalities, but they're very responsible people and living a normal life without overgoing, of course, as we discussed, without overdoing it in terms of accumulating things we don't really need just for the sake of a sense gratification or something. But when people see like that, then they become a bit appreciative. And when you render some service, maybe you do a little service for them, and then bring a little Krishna consciousness into it. Maybe you give them help mow their lawns or something, and then discuss Krishna consciousness with them. I mean, it depends how far you want to go and what level we're on, etc. But there's always ways of making people a little interested in Krishna consciousness. It takes time to find out what and how to do that. Hare Krishna. Okay. So let's be greedy for devotional service as much as we can, even if it is a little bit in the beginning, a little bit mixed. We may be greedy for prasadam more and more. Although later on we read Prabhupada says that this is also dangerous, that one becomes greedy to eat more than required, even in the name of the devotee, is in a risky situation. But in the beginning, that's not usually the case. If we want to advance, then it becomes every level. They could say that these directives are there, but they take on a slightly different perspective on the levels of our devotional advancement. And we pray for all of your good health, and we hope that everyone will be having a wonderful, whatever you're going to have till the end of the year. We'd like to say book marathon, but I don't know if everybody's involved in that. But some of you are. And we hope and pray that the Lord will bless you with the inspiration and the enthusiasm to at least endeavor to distribute Srila Prabhupada's books, not just in the next 2 or 3 weeks, but whenever the chance arises. Keep good health, and Krishna willing, will, as I said in the beginning, I won't probably be giving any more Zoom classes this month because we're going to try to put a little effort. 3 or 4 of our Sanktam party are now having this next week will be unable. They won't be able to carry on anymore. They've got other services, or they're going home for the family or something for Christmas, and they won't be with us for the last week or 2 of the marathon. So I'm going to try to get out there and try to distribute a few books as well. Krishna, we need your blessings. Without the blessings of the devotees, we haven't got much hope. So even in all these topics today, we really need the blessings of the Vaishnavas to become free of greed, or whatever it may be. Otherwise, we are very weak, and the material energy is very strong. So we need this. The mercy of the strong, and the Vaishnavas are all representatives, all connected to Krishna, so we need their mercy. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So we'll have a little kirtan, and I'm going to get ready for the next class this afternoon here in France. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama Hare Rama, Hare Krishna Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama Hare Rama, Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Krishna Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama Hare Rama, Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama Hare Rama, Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama Hare Rama, Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama Hare Rama, Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Shila Prabhupada ki jai, Hari Rama Sankirtan ki jai, Gaur Premanande. Oh, glorious to Shila Prabhupada. Whoops. Hare Krishna. Hare Bo. Hare Krishna, everyone.
Thank you all very much for your association, as always. And we pray that you will all remain forever in service of Srila Prabhupada's mission and ever increasing our devotion, consciousness of Krishna, and keep safe. Another barometer, sometimes you could say, of our practice is we have to watch our health also, although ultimately we hear statements of a more transcendental nature, but we do have to bear in mind our health and the balance in our family and other factors like that too. And in our execution of devotional service, to keep a wholesome situation which we maintain some kind of peace and facility for the practice of our bhajan. But don't forget those factors too, not just our spiritual achievements or spiritual practices, etc. Jai Shri Prabhupada. Haribo, 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 Hare Krishna. Haribo. All silence. Haribo. Hare Krishna.